Good morning, everybody. This is Stephen Pugh of the Home Bible College. It is January the 13th, and we're beginning our readings today in Genesis chapter 31. In today's reading, we see how Jacob had to break away from Laban, and how Jacob has to learn how to break off relations in order to follow after God. And later we see how Jacob had to learn how to be restored to his brother Esau. The story of Jacob is a series of lessons of interpersonal relations. In yesterday's reading we saw that Jacob was trying to break off ties with Laban. First, Jacob heard what others were saying about him, and it was not good. And they were saying that Jacob had been stealing Laban's sheep. When he came into contact with Laban, he found that there was not the same open relationship as there had been in the past. Jacob was learning. He was learning how men react and interact one with another. Then the Lord appeared to Jacob, telling him to go home. Wow, what a relief. So Jacob called his wives to meet him where the sheep were gathered, and he explained what the situation was. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, "I have seen what Laban did to you. Now get up and go back to Bethel, where you set up a pillar." Jacob got up and set his sons' wives on camels and set out. Laban had gone to shear his sheep, so Jacob knew he would be very busy. Rachel had stolen the images of her father. Now this is interesting. There was idol worship in the family of Laban, and Rachel was very much part of that. Jacob didn't tell Laban that he was leaving. After 3 days, Laban found out that Jacob had left, so he gathered his men and chased after Jacob for 7 days. However, the Lord appeared to Jacob, telling him not to speak. The Lord appeared to Laban, telling him not to speak a word either in favor or against him. Now that is quite outstanding, isn't it? When Laban met Jacob, he said to him, "Why did you leave without telling me? You slipped away with my daughters as if you had stolen them from me." He says, "I could do you harm, but God appeared to me and told me not to say anything to you, good or bad. However, my idols are missing." "Why did you steal them, Jacob?" Jacob said, "Search for them," not realizing who had taken them. Okay, they searched everywhere, but Rachel was sitting on them in her tent. She said, "Please excuse me not getting up, but this is my monthly time." After all the searching, Laban was infuriated. You know, in the commentary, sometimes I get names muddled up or just back to front. It was the time of plain speaking. He said, "I've been with you for 20 years. I served you 14 years for my wives and 6 years for the cattle, and you've changed my wages 10 times. Now if God had not looked after me, I would have been leaving with nothing. But God has seen that I've been putting up with, and he rebuked you last night." Laban answered that everything you have is mine, but let me make a covenant which you will be a permanent understanding between us. See, Laban said, "Well, my daughters are mine, and all the cattle are mine, and the camels are mine." You see, Laban, as far as he was concerned, he didn't feel he was letting go of anything. And that was the problem, you see. That's why Jacob had to leave. So Laban answered that everything you have is mine, but let us make a covenant which will be a permanent understanding between us. Now all the air has been cleared. And Jacob went on his way, and the angels of the Lord met him on the way, and Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to Esau, his brother. You see, Jacob was in a difficult situation. He had Laban behind him, but thankfully at Mizpah, God witnessed between the two, not to keep them together, but to keep them apart so they wouldn't hurt each other. Sadly, in relationships, there has to come a parting. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because sometimes, brethren, they can hurt one another, and it's better to have a parting than to continue to hurt one another. Wow, there's so much in these passages that is absolutely fascinating. So Jacob went on his way, and the angels of the Lord met him on the way, and Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to Esau his brother. And they had a special greeting from Jacob, but they brought back news that Jacob had 400 men, and they were coming after him. And this made Jacob afraid. Perhaps his brother's anger was still hot towards him. So Jacob divided his people into 2 companies in case Esau attacked. At least half of them would escape. Then Jacob prayed, asking for special protection from the Lord. He reminded God of his promises, and he confesses his unworthiness. Then he says, "Deliver me from the hand of my brother, because I am afraid." Then he sent all the cattle and the servants over the brook, and then he slept alone. And he arranged for 3 sets of presents for the flock of Esau. Jacob was alone. Yet there wrestled with him a man until the breaking of the day. When his adversary saw that he could not fight against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh and put it out of joint. And Jacob was a defeated man, but he hung on until daybreak. And the man said, "Let go, let go." And Jacob said, "No, I will not let go until you bless me." And then the man said, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob, liar, supplanter, deceiver, trickster." The man said, "From now on, you will be called Israel. And as God's prince, you will have authority with God and with men." Jacob was blessed there. Jacob named the place Penuel because he said that he saw God face to face. When the sun rose, he staggered on his thigh. He was a broken man. It was not until God had mastered him, and God had finally mastered him. When dawn came, he lifted up his eyes and saw Esau coming. Jacob sent all his family ahead of him, but he kept Rachel and Joseph at the back. Eventually Esau ran to meet him and hugged him and kissed him and wept for joy. He said to Esau, "Seeing your face is like seeing the face of God, and you were pleased to see me." Sometimes there comes a shadow between men, and it is allowed to carry on for a long time, yet after prayer and courage, it's better to go forward and speak in love and put the past behind. Now these 2 passages, in fact the whole life of Jacob, is absolutely full of significant things. We could talk about Laban. We could talk now about how that Laban chased after Jacob and overtook him, and yet God intervened and spoke to Laban to tell Laban not to say anything to him, good or bad. You see, the patriarchs, and Jacob in particular, they were under a special covenant with God, whereby those who say anything about them that's bad, those that curse you, will be cursed. Very important that you don't curse Jacob, otherwise you come under the judgment of God. But there comes a time when Jacob has to declare what he feels. He says, "Look," verse 41, "I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and I served another 6 years for all the cattle, and you have swindled me out of my wages 10 times. Now he says, "Unless God, the God of my father and the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac, had been with me, You'd have sent me away without anything at all. You'd have sent me away alone. God hath seen my affliction and the labour of my hands, and he rebuked you yesternight. That was plain speaking. And so the covenant was made between Laban and Jacob. It wasn't a covenant. People think that the Mizpah covenant is a sort of a beautiful thing that God is going to watch over us while we're apart. Well, this covenant was a covenant to keep them apart. It was a covenant that would make sure that they don't hurt one another. That's what the covenant was about. And take a look at verse 1. Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And he calls the name of the place Mahanaim. And then he goes on, and he finds that he sends a message on to Esau. But then he discovers that Esau is coming to meet him with 400 men. And Jacob thinks, oh no, he's afraid. In fact, he is greatly afraid and distressed. And he divides the people with him and the flocks and the herds into 2 bands. And then in verse 9, we have what I would call the first prayer in the Bible. Now, some people might say, well, there was the first prayer of Abraham when he prayed for Lot. Well, I don't think that was quite a prayer in the same way at all. I think that was Abraham demanding of God what he would do as a righteous God, whether he would judge the righteous with the wicked. But this is the first prayer, I think, in the Bible, verse 9, and this is my password for today. But my password is really verse 11. Okay, now Jacob is in dire straits. He's got Laban behind him, but fortunately Laban's not going to come after him anymore, but he's got Esau ahead of him. And it looks like Esau is coming after him. And so in verse 11 he says, deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he will come and smite me, and the mother with the children. And then he quotes God. He says, because you said, I will surely do thee good, and make thy seed as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. So here was a humble prayer, a straightforward, humble prayer. But there's something, sometimes we pray these prayers, and sometimes God answers. And God answered in the life of Jacob at Peniel when he wrestled with the man till break of day. He was wrestling with God for blessing. However, it was God that was wrestling with him for blessing. See the point? Then we have that beautiful expression in verse 4. It says, Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him. It says, and they wept. This build-up of emotion that had been between them for so long. And finally, they were reunited, and all of the emotion of their brotherly affection comes out. And then the next thing that happens is this, is that Jacob has to explain, look, we need to live apart. It wasn't God's will that he would live with his brother. It was God's will that Jacob would be his own man. And Jacob journeyed to Succoth, and here we have something which is very unusual. Most people are not aware of this. It says Jacob built a house. Jacob built a house. He also, in verse 19, he bought a parcel of the field where to spread his tent at the hand of the children of Hamor. And there he erected an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. This is not just the God of Israel, but this God, the God of Israel. You see, that's the point. What an amazing passage. What an amazing passage. What's encouraging to me is what God can do in the life of a man that is led of him. He's able to sever ties with an ungodly man and he's able to be reunited with a relationship that turned sour a long time ago. Well, there we are. There's the passage for today. Absolutely fascinating. Look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow. Have a great day, and God bless you. Bye for now.